So in this video, what I'm going to do a brief overview of how to get started with Xamarin.Forms. So here I am inside of Xamarin Studio. You can also use Visual Studio. The main difference outside of the user interface is going to be that Visual Studio supports a few extra project types that Xamarin Studio does not. What I'm going to do to get started, I'm going to click New Solution. And obviously, since I'm going to be targeting iOS and Android in both the same project, I want to create a multi-platform application. Now I've got some choices over here. I'm not going to create a game. Native iOS Android, what this does is this creates an application that has two platform specific projects inside of it that you could then share logic code between, but you couldn't share any user interface code. Of course, the purpose of Xamarin.Forms is to share user interface code across platforms as well as logic. So I'm going to select the Forms app. And then I could choose to do this in either C# or F#, but I'll stick with C#. I'm going to give this a name, just call it Demo. And then for some reason I could deselect Android or iOS. I don't know why you would create a Xamarin.Forms project and only target one platform, but you could. And then how you're going to share the code with a portable class library or a shared code project. And then I'll just click Next. This screen I'll leave alone because I'm not going to be using any version control or anything like that. And now it's going to create my project and pull some NuGet packages in. It's going to create three projects. It's going to create this demo project here for the Xamarin.Forms code and layouts. And then it's going to also create a platform-specific iOS project and a platform-specific Android project. Now the reason it still needs these is because iOS is still going to require an application delegate to start up, and Android is still going to require an activity to start up. But notice that this is just very, very bare bones. And in fact, if we look inside, for example, the application delegate, it's calling this Xamarin.Forms init method, and in main activity, it's doing something similar here. So what's happening is it's taking the entry points, the platform-specific entry points, and calling into the Xamarin.Forms code. Now we're not going to touch the platform-specific parts because we're going to be doing something very, very simple here. But for a more complex application, you very well may need to. However, still Xamarin.Forms is going to give you the ability to share about 90% of your code. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So let's take a look inside of the Xamarin.Forms project. There's always going to be an application derived class, in this case called app, and Xamarin Studio has created one for us. Content in Xamarin.Forms is generally organized into pages, and a content page is one of those page types that we could use. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new content page, and it's got a property of title, and it has some content as well. Now the content, what we're going to do is we're going to set the content to be something called a stack layout. A stack layout is going to take user interface elements, and it's going to stack them by default one on top of the other, but it also could go they could also stack them side by side. The content's going to have its child elements. In this case, there's only one, which is going to be a label that has text welcome to Xamarin.Forms. And in this case, these two properties here will center the text, center the content vertically and horizontally. But that's not enough. We have to tell Xamarin.Forms that this is the content that we want to show, or this is the content page rather, that we want to show when the application starts up. And we do that by setting the main page property. So the main page property is the initial content to show. Now this code that Xamarin Studio has created for us has actually created a navigation page. Now what this will do is, because usually most of your Xamarin.Forms applications are going to be multi-page, you're going to want to have some kind of easy way to move around them. So what you would do is you would set the initial view to be a navigation page, and then pass the root page of that navigation page into it. In this case, they've got the content page set here. I am actually going to get rid of this and just set the main page to be not the context, but rather the content. just to keep things simple. And with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control Command B to build this. Okay, so now that the build is done, let's take a look, and we can see that we've got these two application specific projects, one of which is bold, the iOS project. When a project is bold, that means it is the startup project. So when you click the Start Debugging button, it will automatically try to start this project. And because it's an iOS project, it will give me a list of simulators that I can choose from to run the project, to run the application in. I'm just going to stick with the default iPhone 6s. So what I'll do is I'll run the project, and it's going to bring up the iPhone 6s simulator, and we get the text that was in the label from the content page. Alright, I'm going to stop that, and then I'm going to right click on the Droid project and set it as the startup project, and now it's bold, and it gives me a list of emulators I can use for Android. Notice I've got two kinds here. I've got Google emulators and XAP emulators. So XAP is the Xamarin Android player, and it's an emulator that Xamarin is building. Right now it's in preview, but it works pretty good, and it's faster than the Google emulator, so I'm going to stick with it, and I will run this in the Xamarin emulator. And we get the same content, but it's just in the context of a Android application. So we got an Android toolbar, we've got the Android supplied interface buttons down here, and I'm going to stop that, and we're going to try something a little different now. So we've seen how to make content in code. This, especially if you're not a technical person, if you're a designer that already knows HTML, this could be a little bit daunting. So just like with WPF, you can use XAML to create user interfaces. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new file in the project. I'm going to tell it to create a Forms content page XAML. So Forms content page would be C# code only. What this will do is this will create a XAML page for the declarative part of the user interface, and then also a C# page for the logic behind the user interface. And I'll call this any page. Okay, and you'll see that here that it's created two files for me, the XAML and the logic. I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and now what I want to do is I'm going to split this into two columns, because what I'm going to do is I want to show you how the C# matches up to the XAML by creating the same layout over here in the XAML. So we've got a content page and a content page, and we have a title for the content page. Well, I can actually set that title in XAML as an attribute of the content page element. So I'll do that. Then we've got a content property, which is represented here. And then I've got a stack layout, and I can represent that with an element. Now the stack layout has its vertical options set to center, which I can do with a attribute as well. And then as far as the children are concerned, I can set a label. And I can set the horizontal text alignment, again to center, and set the text equal to welcome to Xamarin.Forms. And what I'll do is I'll just change it a little bit, just to show that there's no smoke and mirrors. I don't need to do anything to the code behind, but what I do need to do is I need to come over here to the application class and set the main page to be an instance of our new page that we just created. Okay, so I'll build this. Now that it's done, I do have a warning. That's only because I'm not using the content before I've changed that to an instance of any variable. I'm going to set the iOS project to the startup and run it in the simulator. And we get a similar result, but now we have XAML on the end, which proves that it is coming from our AnyPage class and not the class that was created in the demo file here. Just for completeness, let's stop that. Set the Droid project to be the startup. and we get the similar result. Okay, let's do one more thing. So let's close the demo file because we're not going to need it anymore. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show how to do some very simple interactivity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the standard hello world where you put your name in the text box, click a button, and it says hello to you, and the application says hello to you. So the first thing I'm going to need is I'm going to need a text box. Text boxes in XAML and Xamarin.Forms are called entry. And I need to give this a name. And I'll call this text greeted because it is the person who's being greeted. And what this will do is this will create a variable that will be accessible from C# so that I can get at the properties of this entry element. And then also what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a placeholder in here. It says type your name. Well, there we go. And then I'm going to need a button. Now again, since we're in the stack layout here, what's going to happen is it's going to put these one on top of each other. And so I'll just give the button some text of, say, hello, and then I'll also set the clicked event handler to be on clicked. Okay, now in the code behind file, what I'll be able to do is create a method called onClicked, and this is a standard .NET event handler. So it's going to take the object passed in, the object that triggered the event as the sender, and also some additional information stored in event args. And then what I want to do is I want to get the name out, and that will be text greeted.text. And then what I want to do is I want to show the alert box. I'm going to use the cross-platform display alert, which will take a title, a message. I'm going to use C#6 string interpolation syntax to do that, and then some text for the button that dismisses the alert. And what you're going to see is that this display alert is actually a member of Xamarin.Forms, and this is a cross-platform way of creating alert boxes. So I'll build this again. Set the startup project back to iOS. Run it. Okay, we've got a text box here. I'll type my name, click say hello, and it comes up as an iOS alert view here. Stop that. Startup project to Android. And same thing here. And it does the same thing just using an Android, using Android UI components. So that's a very, very basic introduction to Xamarin.Forms.